Hello, everyone. My name is Alicia Cui. I will be your host today, and I work with Dr. Marion Tan at the HIWeather Citizen Science Demonstration Project. So this webinar series draws inspiration from the High Impact Weather Project, a 10-year research initiative by the World Meteorological Organization and the World Weather Research Program that aims to achieve dramatic improvements of the effectiveness of weather-related hazard warnings. This webinar series entitled The Power of Participation, Citizen Engagement in Weather and Climate Science and Action. So we will explore the role of citizen science in improving weather-related hazard warnings, increasing public awareness and understanding of weather science. So we will have a diverse range of speakers from all over the world. They will discuss how engaging citizens in science projects can improve forecasts for different timescales, enhance their communication, and facilitate social and environmental applications. They will also explore ways to increase public engagement in weather education and promote climate action, therefore by working towards a more resilient future. So by attending these webinars, you will gain a deeper understanding of how citizen science can potentially be used to mitigate the impacts of extreme weather events and reduce disaster risk. So let's warmly welcome our three speakers today. Dr. David Hoffmann from Bureau of Meteorology of Australia. So David is a climate scientist in the Climate Projections and Resilience team of the Bureau. And we also welcome Dr. Beth Ebert, also from Bureau of Meteorology, Australia. Beth is a senior principal research scientist and forecast quality team leader in the Bureau's research program. And we also welcome Dr. Marion Tan from Massey University, New Zealand. Marion is a lecturer at the Joint Center for Disaster Research and also co-leads the citizen science flagship of the HIWeather project. And she's specializing in the end user perceptions, especially in the disaster applications. So welcome, three of you. And now I will give the floor to the three of you. So just so you know, they will be presenting for around 30 minutes, and then we will give the floor to the participants to ask questions and stuff like that. So I will stop sharing my slide.
Hey, can you see the slides? All right. Over to you, Marion.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and thank you to Yes Community and HIWeather for organizing this event. We're very happy to be the first of the series of webinar presentations. And really, we are very delighted to be able to start this series of talks. So year in and year out, we have seen many extreme weather conditions. We also have heard from the early warnings for all initiative, the crucial need for us to have early warning, especially to help save lives and reduce economic losses. And this is targeted towards everyone, so it is warnings for all. However, issuing a warning is a complex process, and it really involves a lot of inputs and outputs and expertise and contributions from different organizations and different players to be able to issue out an effective warning. And in that process, there might be certain gaps or shortfalls that would hinder us from delivering warnings for the people. So today we will touch on a little bit of that aspect, and we will cover how potentially citizen science can bridge these gaps in the warning value chain. So next slide, please, David. But before we go there, I think it's very important for us to first cover some of the initial concepts that will help understand us the topic that we're discussing today. So I'll first cover the concept of citizen science, what it is, and then we'll cover what is the concept of value chain. And more importantly, we'll discuss a little bit about the Value Chain Project, a very important initiative that will be, we will discuss that. And then from there, having this better idea of citizen science and value chain, we'll talk about how does this intersect? How does citizen science and the value chain intersect? And how can we bridge the gaps? And where are the potential opportunities that we can do so that we can improve our warning chain and subsequently effective warnings for all. And then hopefully we have enough time to have a bit of Q&A. So next slide, please. So about citizen science, citizen science is really a concept that was developed by trying to distinguish science that is being done by the public with or without professional scientists. So I'll go to the definition of citizen science, please, David. Next slide. So citizen science is basically scientific discovery done, at least in part, by individuals who wouldn't really identify themselves as professional scientists or researchers, especially in our day and age of where we have technology, we have so much information at our hands. The people are more empowered to do science, and they might not have the degree or the background for it, but they can be involved in the scientific process to answer questions that may be difficult to answer. So citizens in citizen science can be people that they can be involved in different stages of the research process. We usually see citizen science for data collection. We ask people to collect data and contribute to the scientific discovery. But citizen science can also be about the people getting involved in the analysis and even writing up or the output of the citizen science process. They can also be involved in identifying the problem itself and then finding the ways to solve them. So knowing that something needs to be researched. So even some of these projects that we see might not have professionals involved. So next slide, please. So in citizen science projects, we can see that scientists do have some influence, and scientists and citizen scientists or the citizens also have influence in the project. So scientists can lead, and then they can ask the public to contribute data, or they can ask the public to do some interpretation. But also on the other hand, we can see projects where the citizens or the public, they're the ones who are leading the project. We have a co-design process, a fully collaborative process where there is engagement between the citizens, the scientists to solve a complex problem. There's a range of these different projects that we can see. And this is not just in the weather space. We see this in environmental science. We can see this in other sciences as well. But why is it important that we talk about citizen science in the weather sphere? So next slide, please. So in meteorological, climatological, and hydrometric research, citizen science is actually particularly important, and it has its role in filling some gaps, especially if we have areas where are remote or hard to access, but have people in them. Citizen science can play a crucial role in filling these gaps to contribute some data to help our scientific understanding. So citizen science is particularly useful in this space, especially in high impact weather and early warnings. So next slide, please. I'll pass it over to you, David.
Great, thank you, Marion. So now I want to get more into the value chain project and the concept of the warning value chain. And just to start it out with, for those who are not familiar with this notion of the value chain, and this concept originated in the economic studies in the 80s and was kind of used to describe a process in which a useless product is made useful for the end user. So as a simple example, I always have a piece of timber, which is kind of useless for the regular people, but if you make a chair or a table out of it, it becomes useful. And during this process, the product goes through certain steps in which it is manufactured from the timber to the table or a chair. Now, this concept is quite simple and cannot be very easily translated to other services, such as national meteorological and hydrological services. But we can generally use this concept of making something useless, using something useless and making it useful for the end user in the warning value chain context. So here we are using this tool to characterize and evaluate the value in a process that aims to reduce the cost and damages from hydrometeorological and geophysical events. And here at the bottom, we see one of many value chains and networks that exist out there. So here we're going into the weather, where we use observations, which are particularly use this for many regular citizens, because it doesn't provide you any information about what the future weather will bring. So this goes into the weather forecast, the hazard forecast, a warning is issued and communicated. And with this information, people can then put this warning into action, act on it, make decisions that are then generate the value from this warning. So putting this into the high impact weather context, the project has come up with this figure here that you can see. And here the mountains are representing the different capabilities and actors in the warning value chain. So we're looking at the observations starting from the left, the weather forecast, hazard forecast, impact forecast, then the warning communication at the very end, and the decision making. And all these mountains are connected through bridges, and that is where the information flows from one capability to the next one. And during this process, from the observations all the end to the decision making, value can be added, but also can be lost. And with each stakeholder who is involved, they bring different experiences and tools and information sources that might enhance the value. So for example, adding more observations might lead to more precise weather forecasts. But they also can reduce value if, for example, not all the information that is available is transferred to the next step. So the weather forecast is less accurate because not all observations went into it, or the warning is not distributed across many channels. So less fraction of the population gets this warning. We can kind of summarize these gains and losses along the value chain that you can see here in the bold font. So we're looking at certainty, at lead time, at local accuracy, the relevance of the warnings, the engagement with the community, as well as the mitigation actions that are then acted on at the very end. Any uncertainties that kind of arise during the value chain propagate through the chain. So once we have uncertainties coming in at the very beginning, they only become bigger towards the end. And there are many ways and how we can kind of add value and reduce the losses in this value chain once we know how to measure them and how to quantify them. And that brings me to the value chain project, which Beth will talk about.
Thank you, David. And why don't we go to the next slide? I'm just going to say a few words about the WMO project that is the parent, of course, for the HIWeather project and the flagship project on warning value chain approaches for evaluating the end-to-end warning chain. So this is a 4-year project that started in the end of 2020, and it goes until the end of 2024. We're using the value chain both as an analysis approach to understand existing forecast and warning chains and be able to measure them to understand how we can make them better. And we're also in the project trying to review existing warning chains for high impact weather events. So the first part, trying to understand what warning chains look like, and the second part, having that evidence of high impact events and how the warning chains were put together, what happened, what went well and what didn't go so well, and using that as a database for learning. So what we hope to produce at the end of the 4-year project is a value chain framework, so a guidance document that will help people who are interested in using value chain approaches for warnings, but more broadly for other kinds of forecasts or sort of service-related information value chain provision. We've also created a questionnaire that is helping us to gather the data for these high impact events. And it's got a lot of really pointy questions in the questionnaire, and David will show you an example in a minute. And we're using that as a sort of an interim approach to collecting information about these high impact events. But we've also learned that the questionnaire is kind of a nifty tool in its own right, that it doesn't need to necessarily be part of our project. Anybody can pick it up and use it to understand for some kind of high impact event what happened. So, you know, how was the forecast performance, how were the links between the different communities involved in the warning chain, and potentially where could citizens get involved. And then finally, as we do collect these case studies, we'd like to put them into a proper database online that can be used by anybody who's interested in high impact weather and warning chains to understand what happened for different events, to be able to compare across events. And it's really a research database that hopefully will be useful for answering lots of different kinds of questions. Next slide, please. So if you're interested in looking at the questionnaire yourself, you can use this QR code and go there and have a look from the High Impact Weather website and download it and use it for yourself. And if you do use it, we would be really happy to get examples from the community of case studies that you may have worked up and include that in our database, because all of the data is extremely valuable. And David's hinted at it already, but although we started out certainly in the weather space, geophysical hazards such as tsunami, volcanic eruptions, and so on, anything for which a warning can be made, all of those kinds of hazards are also extremely relevant and are being collected as part of the project. And you can see in the photos there examples of some of the recent events that we've been using as case studies, from winter storms to hurricanes, floods, the eruption of the volcano in Tonga, bushfires, typhoons, you know, and anything that has got warnings associated with it is of interest to us. And I should say it needn't be a disaster event. It can be a run-of-the-mill kind of warning, because there's a lot to be learned from those as well. So I'll go on to the next slide, and I think I'll be handing back over to David to talk about some of the questions.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. So I'm having a closer look at our questionnaire, and Beth has already said that it has a lot of pointy questions, and there are about 80 questions in total, where we try to collect the information on each of the different nodes in the value chain. Kind of bringing the conversation here back to citizen science, I pulled out the questions in this questionnaire, which are pointing at citizen science or the involvement of citizens in particular hazardous events. We can kind of group these questions into two parts. So the first three questions, especially, they kind of belong to more of the weather part, the modeling, where citizens, and probably especially citizen science projects, are involved. This can be, for example, like any non-traditional observational data that is used in weather forecasting, such as from private weather stations that are feeding into an observational network. For example, Wonderground is doing that, where citizen science can have their own weather station set up and upload the data to them. There are also other citizen science projects where citizens can run weather models on their own home computer, and these forecasts are then contributing to a larger ensemble to make better probabilistic forecasts. And then the second set of questions is more than targeted towards the latter half of the warning chain, and this is mainly around the usage and dissemination of warnings to the public. And here, citizens can really be the catalyst for these warnings, and to kind of really push them out to the broader public by sharing this information, intentionally or unintentionally. If they just tell their friends, you know, what they've heard about certain warnings that are out that are of interest, or they really put efforts in sharing this through their social media channels. Anything in this sense would increase the value of the warnings. So by looking at these at citizen science in the warning value chain, there's this question of what else is there where citizen science can contribute to raise the value of severe weather warnings. So we want to explore the potential role of citizen science in this warning value chain for high impact weather events. And why should we care? Obviously, the end goal is always to reduce damages and save lives in dangerous events. So any contribution that raise the value in the end of the warnings should be addressed and should be acknowledged and be implemented over the long run. Knowing from these citizen science projects that are out there and are being conducted already, either those I've already told you about or those which are used in ecology, for example, where species are recorded. There are many different citizen science projects. I think they can really amplify the research in some respects. So where can citizen science projects help to improve the various aspects of the warning chain? And the question we're asking is, how can they contribute to this? So that's where the citizen science project and the value chain project came together to tackle this question. And we hosted 2 online workshops with subject matter experts from both citizen science and the value chain project. And maybe even others, I can't quite remember, but they were subject matter experts in those 2 fields. And we brought them together and explored this question using an interactive tool called Google Jamboard, where we kind of discussed 3 topics in a semi-structured approach. And that is one where citizen science and the value chain are sitting, kind of where are they involved, how do they engage with the warnings. Second one is citizen science on the warning value chain, so kind of where they can be involved to add value. And in the end, what is the added value of citizen science in it? We've gone through this kind of using this mountain bridges diagram, and then kind of putting sticky notes onto this Jamboard for each of the questions of it, 3 different Jamboards people could contribute to. And from that, we have kind of grouped this into an Excel spreadsheet and analyzed the outputs. And Marion will tell you more about the findings.
Thanks, David and Beth. So after getting this, subject matter experts in these 2 topics, citizen science and warning value chain, what did we find out? So first is like, if you look at this figure, it's not exactly the value chain, but we had to simplify to explain what we found out. So we kind of simplified the value chain into these 4 quadrants, and it is a cyclical process of the warning value chain. So we start with observations, and from observations we have forecast for weather hazards and impacts, then the warning communication and the decision making and response. So in essence, the chain that you have seen so far, we've kind of summarized in this 4 quadrants. And to summarize, what are the findings that we have heard from our experts in regards to how the citizens on citizen science get involved in this warning value chain. So first thing is, we wanted to know where are citizens involved in this entire chain? We've seen that it is a complex process, and there's many areas of expertise. So if you click, please, David. So the good thing is from our findings is that we can see that citizens can be involved in the many aspects of the value chain. And furthermore, what we saw is that when we talk about high impact weather events, citizens can be involved pre, during, and post high impact weather events. So citizens can be involved as, first as maybe they are part of that event, or perhaps they can be involved in preparing for that event, or perhaps in the post event, they can probably contribute some data. And the other thing that we found out, that when we talk about citizen involvement, we often think, oh, it's an individual contribution from a single person contributing crowdsourced data. But actually, talking to our experts, there are ways for citizens to be involved as a group as well in terms of community interaction. So during high impact weather events, there could be, sharing the warnings to friends, maybe people that no longer have access to information, it can be passed down because, you know, your neighbor, you can tell your neighbor. So there's also some essence of community interaction throughout this chain. It's not just individual contributions or individual involvement in the chain. So this gave us a really good snapshot. So this figure is just a snapshot of our findings of, you know, where are citizens involved. And I think for me as a social scientist, I think it was really valuable to see that, you know, throughout this chain, in each aspect, there is some involvement of the citizens. So even during, you know, for weather and hazard impact forecasting, people's experience of the weather and hazard, these can be used, actually, maybe it can be used towards improving our understanding of events and doing some validation and eventually helping form better warnings in the future. So that's our first finding. This is just like looking at where citizens can be involved in the chain. So for our second finding, let's see if we click next. So this is the same chain again, the 4 quadrants, but now we look at, okay, so rather than just talking about the involvement of citizens in the chain, we also look at where can citizen science projects and initiatives have contributions towards the warning value chain. So what we found out from discussing with our subject matter experts again, so that citizen science, the research, not just the people, the research itself can contribute to the different parts of the warning value chain and enhance warnings. And you can see these orange boxes. These are some examples or some ways citizen science as a research or initiative can contribute to the warning value chain. So if we look at observations, for example, so what are the citizen science initiatives potentially can contribute to the chain? So it could be hands-on projects, for example, building a weather station, you know, science projects with the communities that could help contribute towards providing observations. And then let's say if we look at the other side of the chain, when we look at like decision making and responses, we can see that, you know, where can citizen science be valuable in this aspect. So it could be towards, you know, if we have citizen science initiatives where the purpose is towards, you know, engagement with the community, then we can probably have, you know, warning ready citizens. No, so so this is where, you know, decision making and response can be better if people have been engaged in these citizen science initiatives. So the other thing that we found out, so when we talk about citizen science projects, as people can contribute data or contribute to analysis, and it can be as simple as being passive contributions, or it could be active contributions. So people can be involved in these initiatives simply by, you know, providing observations through WhatsApp messages or providing photos and observations or videos in apps. Or perhaps this might be a little bit more passive, like just sending photos of data contribution. But it can also be active in a sense. So citizen science, as I've shown you earlier, can have citizens more involved in the co-design process. So, you know, for example, citizen science initiatives that have a education focus has a more active role, co-design role, and engagement with the community. So this is one kind of finding that we found out, and David will discuss a little bit of what are these implications of these findings. But a little caveat, I'll caveat before David shows the slide where the caveat is there, that our project in this kind of exploration where these two interact, we kind of only just had this discussion with subject matter experts. We understand that this is a limitation, but I think having these insights, you know, we already think that yes, citizen science can have a role, but having some evidence towards, you know, pointing out where in the chain that there can be added value for this citizen science. I think this is, you know, it's a valuable exercise, a valuable finding for us to know where in this chain we can further explore so that we can have more contributions for citizen science and enhancing the value chain. But I'll pass it on to David to talk a little bit more about the implications of our findings.
All right, thank you, Marion. So kind of just distill of what we have learned through this exploration of citizen science and the value chain. And we can kind of group this into 3 learnings. The first one is the value of citizen science in bridging communication gaps. And here we see citizen science not as the endpoint, but really as the disseminators and facilitators of communication. Marion has pointed out that this can be done like through sharing warnings, any information, warning information that citizens come across, not just to family members or friends, but also wider through the channels. The public is not homogeneous. There's a diverse group, and many weather warnings are not tailored to underrepresented communities. And with citizens as facilitators of communication, they can bring the warnings to those underrepresented communities, kind of by speaking to them directly, helping them understand the warnings, and helping them to act. The second finding is it's enriching warnings with citizen science data. And here it's really recognizing the power of the crowd. If you have many weather observations been done by citizens, and there are many out there who would be interested in contributing, I'm sure, if they all had their weather station provide data, you would, in cities or even rural areas, get very fine gridded observational data that could be fed into observations, or even recording any impacts, either through video footages or photographs that have maybe shared through social media, can be used to verify impact forecast and hazard forecast as well. There are also intangible and social benefits that come to citizen science or to the citizens through the engagement in citizen science. And this being just more aware of the topic that they're dealing with, of hazardous events, the understanding of the warnings, and this both increases their resilience. However, we are also acknowledge, and we haven't talked about it in too much depth in the project, but there are also challenges and limitations to citizen science. The first one is coming up, especially with contributions of any data, is the data quality that might not be of best quality that goes into any observations. So there might be some post-processing be necessary to uplift the quality of the data. And there's also maybe declining personal interest, despite some very initial excitement about contributing to citizen science observations. This might curtail with time, especially during longer citizen science projects or longer contributions. Let's say, for example, the weather station isn't working anymore and you're not getting it fixed ASAP. So there's some observations falling off. Others are personal biases regarding research objects. Not everyone really has a clear understanding or how they want to contribute, or they want to contribute in a certain way that might not align with the objectives of the project. And the last one is when looking at the value chain, we are kind of considering cost-benefit analysis, and the value is only rectified if the benefit that comes out is bigger than the cost that goes in. And here we have the cost of rolling out and conducting and analyzing those projects. So it can be quite cost intensive to do the training for citizen science, providing devices or equipment, analyzing the data, especially if there are issues with data quality, and also just staying engaged takes a lot of time of researchers. But these were our warnings, and yeah, Marion has already pointed out the limitation of the study, so I don't want to dwell on it further. But if you want to know more about this small project, citizen science engagement in the value chain, the paper is open access. You can read it by scanning the code you get there, or you can take a screenshot and write off the URL code. But yeah, please distribute the paper further as well to any interested colleagues or anyone anyway. And the last slide here is just a summary of those two projects, of the citizen science and value chain project, which are sitting underneath the HIWeather project, with the main objectives and deliverables. On the left side, we have the citizen science guidance note that you can download from the HIWeather website, as well as some resources for the value chain project. And there's also the questionnaire linked on this webpage. You can visit the HIWeather webpage if you need to know, or if you want to know more about both projects and want to engage with. And there are also 2 contact addresses that you can email to stay engaged and stay informed. And with this, I want to thank you, and I think we can go to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, Marion, and Beth. I already see there are 2 comments, 2 to 3 comments in the chat box, but the rest of the participants, please feel free and don't be shy to raise your hands. And first of all, before people are still probably digesting what has been talked today, and so Raj raised the question, do we have examples where this value chain concept is validated as meaningful and successful? Either the original authors or subsequently someone? If so, for what sort of cases?
Yeah, I might have a crack at that one first, and then let David and Marion, if they want to add some more. There's a couple of really nice ones in the literature, but there are actually plenty out there, and they're not always necessarily labeled as value chain. So sometimes if you're reading about high impact weather events and what happened, there actually is an implied value chain, but it may not be in the title. But two that you can look at if you're interested to find out more. There's a study by Jeff Lazo, L-A-Z-O, who's a economist retired from NCAR, and he looked at the value of impact-based decision support services in the United States for winter weather, and he compared the situation before these impact-based warnings were available and after, and looked at the economics of how additional data, additional information flowed through the value chain to lead to greater benefit. That's one paper. And then another one led by Rebecca Emerton in the UK, looking at flood early warnings associated with tropical cyclones impacting in southeastern Africa. And I don't remember which journal that was in, but it was the co-development of some new warning services that involved the weather service and the emergency managers and a whole raft of different groups involved in producing these new warnings and trying to understand what worked well and what didn't work well for these new services. And so that was a really nice analysis of a warning system in the context of a couple of severe events. So those would be the two that I think are really great examples. But increasingly people are starting to think in this way. I might also mention at this stage, although we've been showing this rather linear picture of a value chain, we know in actual fact it's not that simple, that there are groups and linkages and connections being made all over the place, and maybe it's more of a network or an ecosystem rather than a linear chain. And so a lot of the thinking, and particularly from the disaster side of things, is not so much about a linear warning value chain, but a way that value is achieved through the whole engagement across all of the different groups that are involved.
Thank you, Beth. Marion, David, do you have anything to add on?
Oh, I think Beth covered that really, really well. But I do kind of just want to reiterate that, the term value chain might not be used, but we have seen these different processes involved. So it can be, a process, it could be a network. But I think the good thing with the concept of value chain is kind of just showing some linkages and knowing that a lot of these areas link together, and in a different visualization, it might not be a linear process, as Beth mentioned, but a network of different things. And I think the kind of key outcome, especially for the project that we did on looking at citizen science in the value chain, is just looking at where things can have added value or less value. And I think that's just a great visualization tool that would be kind of helpful, especially to try to understand something that is very complex, and having a way to visualize that, I think it's a good way to kind of start conversations, at least.
Yeah, I agree with all of the above. I think I know to mention that there are many studies who are kind of looking at different parts of the value chain. So looking at improvements in just each capability, for example, but there are not many, and the paper that Beth has listed are probably the best way of kind of taking a broader approach, like a step back. where they look at the propagation or the improvements across several capabilities. And yeah, like in any improvements that are like, or studies that have been done, it's often not termed like value chain or value added. It's more about, you know, decreasing uncertainty in forecasts. This is already some process where value can be added and some improvements.
So thank you, David. And I saw Estelle raised her hand. But I do see Sally's question in the chat box, but I will let Estelle talk just to encourage more people to raise your hands. So Estelle.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you can see me, but nevertheless. Good morning, colleagues. I'm not sure. Is there an option for the camera?
Do you see any option? I don't see.
Well, it doesn't matter. It's fine. Good morning and good evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much for these very, very interesting presentations and all the hard work that goes into this, and also this opportunity to link the citizen science flagship to the value chain flagship. And I think it makes a lot of sense, of course, to bring these things together. And I'm glad to see that Sally is also online. It would also be interesting to link the impact-based side of this value cycle, network, chain, whatever you want to call it, into all of this. And the wonderful thing that I see about the concept that you raise here is that this can be especially useful, especially not only in developing countries or least developed countries, where, for example, the warnings cannot be disseminated via very modern ways because people don't have access to internet, or they don't have, you know, website access or internet access or whatever. So then they rely a lot to fill this whole cycle with citizens that word of mouth carry the warning from, for example, a community leader to the people in the informal settlement, or to people that are maybe even disabled people. So this whole concept is, to me, really, really useful, especially in developing countries or least developed countries, but of course also in other countries. But relying on people to spread the message is sometimes quite there's a huge need for that, especially also in rural areas where people don't have access to whatever is happening in a city. And the same concept is applied at the moment in a project that is funded by HIWeather in Southern Africa, where we're trying to do the same thing as what you mentioned here, looking at the shorter timescales, nowcasting and short-range forecasting, and then really getting it to people in cities, disabled people, and women. So there's a lot of emphasis on that. And Adrian Perels, who was involved in the value chain project and was involved in the SERA working group, is involved in that project to do the socioeconomic benefits. And there's a whole private company in South Africa that is working with the social science and making the link to the citizen science to bring the science that we're going to try and do in the project to people that can actually really use it. And I talk really about people at, you know, root level, ground level. So this concept that you described is especially useful in such a situation. This project is led by University of Leeds in the UK, but active in Zambia, Mozambique, and South Africa. So I just want to conclude with that I think there's a lot of good links to that, and this concept applies many places, but also in developing countries, least developed countries, and we really appreciate the work that is done in the project. Thank you very much to everyone who contributed.
Thank you, Estelle. The next question is from Dr. Sally Potter. First of all, thank you for the speakers for the great presentation. Do you think there is potential for questions to be added to the value chain questionnaire for citizens to directly contribute? The current question seems to be about people rather than directly for them. Or would this be better in separate context-specific questionnaires?
I might have the first go at that. That's a really good question, Sally, and thanks for asking that. When we put the questionnaire together, we had a lot of potential things that we could ask about, and it was pretty tough job to say, well, this question is important enough to stay in the questionnaire, and this other question, well, it's starting to go down a rabbit hole, so maybe not. And what I would say is that probably starting with that one, but maybe adapting it for the citizen science contributions might be the better approach, rather than trying to continually add more and more questions. That said, there is in the questionnaire, on every page, there's a additional analysis, additional issues and successes and things, which is a kind of a wild card type of a question. So even in the existing one, it's possible to insert some citizen science, citizen contributions, but without directly prompting for it, it's probably less likely that people would just think to automatically do that. So I think it would be really nice to have a version of this that is specifically targeting the citizen involvement, and maybe that's something we could look at doing. I don't know, David, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think that sounds very good. Having this question that we currently have for the citizens, we thought about kind of having this questionnaire kind of for further distribution, not just more by researchers and practitioners within National Weather Services. But there we thought might be too much like misunderstanding in the community and how to answer the question. But having maybe like a sub questionnaire which kind of can contribute to the main questionnaire, which is more targeted for citizens' involvement, would be a good solution.
Thank you, David. Now we have one more question from Martin Gerber, and later on, because we do receive a few comments sharing their citizen science projects in different parts of the world, and we do want to give floor to them to perhaps share a little bit about different projects. But before that, Martin asked, would it be taken too far to call answering any survey, for example, on weather warning reception, understanding, usage, a citizen science activity?
I think I can answer that question, and feel free, David and Beth, to add in. So I think this is a question that is often asked, like, to what extent can you call something citizen science, or is it just really data gathering? And we've done many social science studies wherein we've issued out surveys. Is that citizen science? And will it be too far to call surveys a citizen science? Very, very good question, Martin. But personally, for me, and I think a lot of people studying citizen science, there is still that delineation where citizen science is about involvement. With the graph that I showed you, there is involvement in the citizen science where they are part of the scientific process. So a key question for me as a scientist when I'm doing projects is when I consider, is this citizen science or is this data collection? So my question is the person or the person that is getting involved, are we studying them? Or are we asking them to contribute to the initiative, to the study? So if the survey is about their experience, or is it about them as their demographics as part of people receiving the warning, then I wouldn't go far to say that is citizen science, because they become the subjects of study. And that is more of really, maybe it can be a participatory social science research where survey is involved. But for me, when we talk about citizen science, when the definition of it is about the involvement of the citizens, the public, in a participatory process, that is citizen science. And sometimes that can be in the form of survey, where we use survey tools such as SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics or Google Forms to ask for contributions. But the contributions are not particularly about the citizens, but about what they've observed or what they've measured, or what they can contribute in their area where no one else can maybe see, because that is a remote area. So I think one of the fundamental questions, and it might be quite helpful to think about, when I ask a person or a citizen to contribute, am I studying them or am I studying their contributions? And that will kind of like really help us to think about, whether a survey, is it truly citizen science, or is it merely asking contribution from a wide area towards to answer a research question. And it is a fine line, and I don't have the exact answer to this question, but as a social scientist, that is a question that I often ask, like, am I doing a survey, or am I actually getting citizens involved in the scientific process, and perhaps their contribution is in the data collection. And one thing that I really want to highlight is the reciprocity as well. So if one of the things for data collections in a citizen science initiative is that they're part of that process. So they should be part of that, receiving, what is the outcome of our analysis? Have they been part of that process of receiving the end output of the data collection, analysis, and reporting? So I think it is a tough question, and I'm glad that you asked it. And it is probably a conversation that needs to keep continuing as we, move forward with this. The science of citizen science. So yeah, and I'm happy to hear Beth and David's thoughts on that as well.
Pass. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Before anyone else asks any question, I was wondering if Roxy Cole would like to just speak a little bit about the citizen science project that you just shared in our chat box about the flood forecasting in India. So it's just maybe it's better for you to directly share a little bit about us. Oh, sure. Let me allow you to speak first. Here we go.
Oh yes. Good morning from India. Can you hear me? Perfect. Yeah. Perfect. Wonderful discussion. I got many insights, and also pretty well organized framework that we can work on. Anyway, I will try to share my experience in a very as a very short discussion. So. In India, as you know, we are seeing a flurry of extreme weather events at a very, across the country. We have floods, sea level rise, landslides, heat waves right now going on, monsoon changes, everything. So this is like this happened like a story, and more like a citizen science activity, right away from the citizens itself. It was not started from scientists like me. So what happened is that in a large country with a large population like India, the national agency like the Met Department cannot reach or monitor beyond a district level. But there are very localized impacts like cloudbursts and extreme rainfall events happening across the country. So in my hometown, there is a state called Kerala. There is a river called the Minichal River. It's an 80-kilometer long river, and it has been flooding quite often in the recent period. And so the community themselves felt the impacts of climate change. So they started monitoring the variability of rain and the river. So they started installing rain gauges and river gauges. Then they also started involving scientists like me. So right now they have a huge high density network across the region with rain gauges in places like in schools, educational institutions, colleges, and at homes of citizens. Yeah, and the river starts in the high range, flowing downstream to the mid-range to the coastal region. Yeah. So right now they are able to by connecting this rain gauges to the river monitoring downstream, they are able to tell if there are extreme or heavy rains or cloudbursts in upstream. They are able to tell in how much time and at what level the river will swell. And in 2019 floods, there were heavy rains upstreams. They warned a colony of people downstream who were living by the banks of the river. At first, they were not ready to evacuate, because when they saw the river was dry. Yeah, but by showing the data and with persuasion, they were evacuated, and in 2-3 hours that area was wiped out with flood water. Yeah, so about the lives of 60 families were saved. So citizen science network, this is a perfect example where we can say citizen science networks can save lives and livelihoods. So this is a beautiful example, but now we are trying to organize it with long-term data, and maybe use artificial intelligence and machine learning methods, connecting this river gauge and rain gauge data as well. Yeah, so that's a quick summary of this. But one thing we feel which is always affecting us, the group, is finance. So if we need to scale this up for a larger area, we need field staff, we need rain gauges, river gauges, much more standard equipment, and so on, and also websites and servers where we can collect and compile the data. Yeah, so that is one factor where there is a struggle, and we would like to propose this as a model for the across South Asia, where these kind of changes are rampant. Thank you.
Thank you,
Roxy.
Thank you for sharing that, and it's good to see the different kind of citizens in science initiatives and how it has been applied to in your context, in flood forecasting. So it's good to see these examples. So really, thank you.
Happy to work with your team, because we can exchange ideas as well and see, how we can work together.
Thank you, Roxy. We do have one last question from Anil. As we have a huge debate about uncertainty on science knowledge generated by the scientists themselves, here we're talking about citizen science. So how do you think citizen science contributing towards uncertainty discussion? And while you answer, be a little bit aware of the time, and then we're wrapping up later.
So I'll just probably answer this quite briefly. So I think that is a difficult topic to be answered solely by citizen science. Probably that is something that maybe a scientist can, initiate that question. But how do you think citizen science can contribute to this discussion? Because if it's, are we collecting data, asking citizens to collect data? Are we asking citizens to analyze data? Or are we asking citizens to, help report the data? So in a sense, I think in this type of questions, it might be a little bit more like kind of a more traditional social science question, wherein we can, ask the people what they think about uncertainty. And that is because, and in a sense, I can't fully picture yet, but, maybe Anal has an idea on how we can engage citizens in the scientific process. So I guess in trying to answer that question, citizen science can be, answer different questions, not just warnings. So if you think about the entire scientific process, just think, where can citizens contribute in this process? Not as data points, as we're not, but as some people that contributes to answering that research question. Then perhaps there is a citizen science project there. But I can't say for certain. I don't have an idea on top of my head on how we can do citizen science to answer that question. But perhaps there is something in the future, and some exploration that can be explored. But at this stage, we've seen a lot of citizen science where data collection is the main contribution, analysis, but also reporting and community engagement in a sense. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you,
so
Marion.
That's it. My answer to a hard question.
Thank you. And actually, Anil can talk to Marion face to face because we share a building. Cool. I need to wrap up now. Thank you very much, our three speakers. And also, before we go, we do acknowledge Gisberta's comments that this is a community that you can keep engaging with us, and citizen science has existed for quite a while, but apparently it is still a quite new concept and has a lot of areas for us to explore. And we do need to build a better structure perhaps, and solve more standardized questions. So excited to explore new areas and with all of us here. And this is a webinar series, so we already have a lined up speakers in the next few months. So on the 11th of July, we have Dr. B.A. Racoma from University of the Philippines to talk about the memes, maps, memes, and meteorology. Sounds like a fun concept. And at the end of July, we have Maureen from Ghana Meteorological Agency to talk weather Ghana. So that's also her citizen science project. And in September, we have Thomas to talk about Trusted Spotter Network from Austria Met Service. So please stay tuned. Thank you all for coming today, and see you next time.